The city lay hushed under a blanket of night, lamplight painting the wet pavement, while unseen tension curled between the buildings as officers watched from the shadows, waiting for the signal that would turn suspicion into action. From a narrow alley, Shaker Mazur emerged, his tall figure folding into the dim streetlight as he glanced around with the practiced caution of a man used to watching for eyes that might follow him. Across the road at a small cafe, Aliyah Kamar sat with a magazine, open, on her lap, but her gaze never on the pages. She watched, poised and calm, ready to alert her team the moment something moved wrong. Susie the Jordanian adjusted the tiny earpiece nestled in her ear, lips pressed thin as she absorbed every distant footstep and whispered into the mic to keep the whole operation coherent. In the belly of a black van a few blocks away, the SWAT team checked radios and tightened gloves, the metallic click of gear and whispered confirmations blending with the hum of a city that still didn't know it was about to change. Shaker slipped into a shadowed doorway and exchanged a small package with a hooded figure, hands working quick and careful. The transaction, a single heartbeat in a long night of secrets. Aliyah tapped her handbag lightly in a prearranged rhythm, a seemingly casual gesture that carried the weight of a whole plan, and slid down the channel to Susie's headset, like a whisper of intent. Susie murmured a curt confirmation into her earpiece, and the word traveled along radios and nerves. Now, turning patient observation into swift, measured movement. The SWAT van eased forward, tires whispering on damp asphalt, as the team prepared to fold themselves around the block and close the space where danger could hide. Sensing the change in the air, Shaker quickened his pace and cast a furtive glance over his shoulder, an animal's instinct telling him that the shadows behind him were not empty. Aliyah rose as if to leave the cafe, phone to her ear in a practiced pose, every step a carefully choreographed part of a plan designed to prevent any escape route from going unguarded. Susie moved with purpose to take a position on the sidewalk, her posture blocking the most obvious avenue of flight, as if she were a living barrier between Shaker and the freedom he had so fiercely pursued. When Shaker's eyes locked on Susie, suspicion and calculation flickered across his face, but there was no time to weigh options, only to react and try to outrun the tightening net. The SWAT van stopped with a controlled urgency, doors swinging open as officers spilled onto the street like shadows turning solid, each one carrying the same steady resolve. Pedestrians gasped and scattered back as the scene snapped into focus, phones rising and curiosity mixing with fear on faces as the quiet evening became a tableau of enforcement. Shaker darted into a narrow side alley, his feet slapping the brick in a frantic rhythm as he tried to use the maze of the city to blur his trail and shake the enforcers. Susie did not hesitate. She pushed into the alley after him, breathing hard but moving with a determination that erased any doubt she might have had about catching him. Aliyah cut through a side street with a quick, efficient stride, handbag swinging at her hip as she angled to cut off another potential escape and close the ring from the opposite side. The SWAT officers fanned out under whispered commands, positioning themselves like pieces on a board, prepared to box in the suspect without causing panic to spill into chaos. In a desperate bid to break free, Shaker vaulted over a trash bin and skidded, lungs burning, through the tight corridor of the alley where light was a distant promise. Susie closed the gap with long, strong strides, the tips of her fingers nearly grazing his jacket as she reached to seize the moment that would end the chase. Suddenly, Shaker produced a small black device from his pocket, a compact object that flashed a new layer of danger into the air and made every officer's jaw tighten with concern. Aliyah's voice was sharp and urgent into her earpiece as she relayed the sighting, her calm exterior giving way to professional alarm as she described the object and its possible threat. The SWAT leader barked a terse order, and the team froze into practiced positions, each member calculating angles and responses in the breath between commands. Shaker twisted and sprinted inside an abandoned building with broken glass at the threshold, the dark interior swallowing him as if the place itself had been waiting for such a night. Susie and two officers followed close behind, boots thudding in the hollow space, while flashlights cut rigid beams through dust and debris, revealing more questions than answers. The interior smelled of mildew and old paper, beams of light catching on floating dust motes as the team advanced carefully down the corridor of the derelict building. Taking 2 stairs at a time, Shaker tried to distance himself by climbing higher into the building, the echo of his own steps making the pursuit feel larger and lonelier at once. Aliyah slipped through a side door onto the second floor and moved along the shadowed hallway with all the quiet confidence of someone who had walked this choreography many times before. When Shaker stopped in a narrow room and realized the exits were blocked, the sharp intake of breath was the sound of a plan collapsing into the single, cold certainty of capture. Susie stepped forward with her weapon trained, voice low and controlled as she ordered him to comply. every fiber of her posture insisting that resistance would be futile. SWAT officers closed ranks and formed a ring around Shaker, steady hands and level eyes making clear that there was no room left for escape. Aaliyah arrived at the room's threshold, chest heaving lightly, but a small, relieved smile flitting across her face as she saw the operation coming together. Shaker's fingers loosened, and the device clattered to the floor, a small sound that felt like a verdict in the hush that followed. Without hesitating, an officer kicked the object aside so no careless hand would reach for it, the motion precise and efficient as trained habit took over. Susie's voice rose, firm and uncompromising, ordering him to raise his hands as she maintained visual control and kept the situation from spiraling into danger. With a defeated slump, Shaker lifted his hands slowly, his face a complex map of anger, fear, and the weary resignation of someone whose choices had cornered him. 2 officers moved in to secure him with handcuffs, the metal clicking shut like punctuation on a night of tension and careful strategy. While officers safety, Aaliyah swept the room with professional thoroughness, eyes combing for documents or items that might explain the network behind the man they had caught. Bending under a warped chair, Aaliyah's fingers brushed leather and metal and she pulled out a hidden briefcase wrapped in grime, proof that the night's risks had deeper roots than one man. As Susie unclasped the briefcase and flipped it open, the sight of stacks of cash and folded documents made her gasp, the enormity of what they had uncovered rippling through the team. The SWAT leader lifted his camera and snapped methodical photos, each image a small, cold piece of evidence that would stitch the story together in courtrooms and reports. Shaker glared at them with something like hatred, jaw tight and eyes burning with the knowledge that the web he had lived inside was unraveling in front of him. With Shaker escorted and guarded, the team led him out through the building's broken doorway and into the harsh night air, where sirens painted the street in urgent color. Outside, the street was awash with the frantic strobe of red and blue lights, cars forming a ring and sending flashes across faces that had gathered to watch order reassert itself. A crowd clustered at the edge of the scene, whispers swelling into dozens of theories as the neighbors and passers-by tried to fill the gaps between rumor and reality. Aaliyah and Susie walked side by side through the dispersing crowd, their shoulders brushing in a quiet show of solidarity as adrenaline ebbed into weary relief. The SWAT van's heavy door slammed shut with a finality that sounded like a seal on the night's work, metal and shadows enclosing the man they had taken. Inside the van, Shaker sat with his head bowed, handcuffed hands resting in his lap, as the weight of what had happened settled into a stunned, contemplative silence. Susie passed the briefcase to the SWAT leader with a curt nod, watching as he secured it for transport. The contents now as much a part of the case as the suspect himself. Aaliyah took one last, steadying look at the abandoned building that had sheltered secrets, thinking of how ordinary structures can hold extraordinary stories. Police tape fluttered in the breeze as officers cordoned off the entrance, the bright barrier turning the ruin into a sealed scene for methodical investigation. The SWAT van rolled away with purpose, lights still blinking as it cut a path toward the station, where questions would be asked and answers cataloged. Susie and Aaliyah rode together in a marked SUV, the car's interior quiet, except for the low murmur of radio chatter and the steadying rhythm of shared accomplishment. Over the vehicle radio, the dry voice of the dispatcher confirmed that the operation had been successful, a small official pronouncement that made the tension of the night begin to ease. The 2 women exchanged a look that was equal parts exhaustion and pride, the kind of unspoken recognition reserved for those who had put themselves between danger and the rest of the city. Behind bars in a dim cell, Shaker sat alone with his thoughts, the clang of the lock and the thin light from a barred window marking the end of a route he had tried to walk for too long. As dawn hinted at the horizon, the city exhaled and felt, for the first time in hours, a renewed breath of safety as patrols resumed and the commotion gave way to routine. Aaliyah and Susie walked into the growing morning light together, their figures slow and human against the awakening urban landscape that would soon be full of ordinary sounds again. In the clean, quiet glare of morning, a police badge caught the sun and shone like a promise, a small, hard emblem of order and the hope that, on this night at least, justice had been done.